Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long day, and we are broadcasting live to the world. Welcome. My name's Kathleen Rogers. I'm president of Earth Day. Unfortunately, two of our speakers, Sharon Burrow in particular, and our representative from ILO could not be here. They're in the middle of lots of union work, but Sharon Burrow represents 220 million union workers and has become an instrumental and critically important partner of the global campaign that Earth Day and many others together are running around climate literacy, civic skill building, and jobs creation. I'm going to turn this over to Vicki from the Glasgow Herald, who will be our moderator today. But thank you all for coming, and we're really pleased to have you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Yes, and well, luckily we do, in actual fact, have Mustafa from the ILO, which is brilliant. And I'm from the Herald newspaper here in Glasgow, and I'm going to be asking some questions to these wonderful people here today. And I thought I'd just start by introducing them. So first of all, we've got Joy Jin, and Joy is founder and executive director of the Youth Leader Fund. And maybe you could just say a little bit about who you are.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm Joy. I'm the Executive Director of Youth Leader Fund under China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation. And I'm also served as Deputy Secretary General of G20 Young Entrepreneur Alliance China Council. So our main audience is about the tech innovators and as well as the entrepreneur leaders.
Hello everyone, I'm Ramon Cruz. I'm president of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is the oldest and largest environmental organization in the United States. So we cover a lot of different issues, in terms of environmental policy and advocacy.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you very much for to Earth Day to invite Iberdrola to be in this panel. We are really glad to be here. I'm Lucia Muñoz. I'm based in Madrid, in Iberdrola, and I'm responsible of climate action and analysis area. I mean, everything concerning awareness, to increase awareness externally and internally in the company. And we are really happy to be here in the COP26 this year again. We've been in many COPs before, and we are here to take action and continue action, accelerating our ways. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mustafa Kamal. I'm the Global Coordinator for Green Jobs at the International Labour Organization. As you may know, the ILO is the only tripartite organization in the United Nations system. So it is unfortunate that Sharon Burrow from the International Trade Union Confederation is not here, but the ITUC carries the voice of the workers' organizations in the ILO, and the International Organization of Employers represents the employers, the business part of the ILO. So I very much look forward to our exchange today.
Thanks, Kamal. So I think we're all aware that we're at a huge turning point in which in order to fight this climate crisis, to meet the targets that that we're setting, that we are going to have to change so many things about the way we do things, the way we create energy, the way we operate with each other. And one of the things that, in order to do that, we are going to have to re-educate ourselves, and we're going to have to think about how we're educating the young. And so I thought, because the title of this talk is The Crucial Role Climate Literacy Plays in Building a Just, Green Global Economy, I just ask our speakers, what do you think climate literacy is? You know, what do we include within that concept of climate literacy? What is it we need to tackle there? So maybe, Kamal, if you could start and then pass along.
Well, thank you very much, Vicky. From an ILO perspective, climate literacy is about educating and informing our tripartite constituents on the possible impacts that climate change and the policy responses to climate and environmental change in general has on the world of work. They need to understand the nature and scale of changes that are likely to occur in terms of possibilities for employment creation, in terms of possibilities of displacement of jobs, and the way we work will change, whatever occupations that one is involved in. So that is our starting point for them, workers, employers, and governments to engage on this debate. So we do that through a number of global and country level assessments and metrics. What we get from most of our analysis today is that if the world is going to implement the Paris goals, the Paris Agreement itself, but at the same time pursue a transition to a circular economy. And I'm saying this because before I went to the ILO, I was at the UN Environment at the time of Achim Steiner when we had the Green Economy Initiative. And we used to say that a green economy has two pillars. It has to be a low carbon economy on the one hand, and it has to be a resource efficient economy. So that's why in our metrics, we are looking at these two dimensions. And what we find is that a move to a low carbon, like a net zero and circular economy could deliver up to 100 million jobs by 2030. But at the same time, some 80 million jobs are likely to be displaced unless we have reskilling, upskilling, and changes in education systems so that we prepare for the employment and the jobs of the future. So therefore, there is a very positive narrative that at the end of the day, we see more jobs and possibly better jobs in the ecological transition. But it is highly conditional to having education systems, skilling, training programs in place, not only to capture the potential for new employment, but also to enable the transition in the workforce of redundant workers, where we're phasing out from fossil fuels and the carbon-intensive industry. So therefore, this is an important part of our work, starting with understanding that nature and scale of changes, and that is the basis for education. So I would like to go a little more into what kinds of skills are we speaking about, what levels of skills in the various sectors, but we can get into that as we proceed.
Should we? Yes, we'll move on to that shortly. Lucia, what do you feel climate literacy means to you and why it's important?
Okay, for me, I mean, for Iberdrola, I think this is climate literacy is really a very powerful tool for change. I mean, it's really key for the green transition. For us, it's also like a bridge, intergenerational bridge. I mean, because we have to teach our young. We have to inspire the young to change, really to change the world, to green the world. So it's difficult for us, and I think that is really important. It's really key to go through there and to make climate literacy in all education as a core of the education. And also it's a language. I mean, it's very difficult to reach, sometimes to reach children, to reach the young with the climate action. I mean, we were thinking how many young people, how many children have been talking or know about the COP, and sure there are not many. But and I think this is the most important thing now. This is the future. So climate literacy is the future for them. So it's really key for us. And from Iberdrola, we are trying to make this an important thing. I mean, we have an important project in schools for teachers, providing them many resources to work with climate change and sustainability in the classrooms, because it's also important to give the teachers this toolbox. Sometimes the teachers don't have the time, don't have resources, don't have the knowledge, sometimes the motivation too, but it's so we have to everybody work that the education, the climate literacy and environmental education reach all the children, all the students, all the young. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, yes, it's interesting what you say about it not reaching the kids or it being difficult to understand, because I think that also that's the case for adults too. And I saw this shocking figure that only 1 in 10 people in the UK were aware of what COP26 was, and about a quarter knew what a carbon footprint was. So adult education, obviously a key thing as well. Ramon.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. When it comes to climate literacy, so I agree with the previous speakers. And of course, classroom is very important. I would say that in terms of the Sierra Club and what we're doing, I think the experiencing nature is extremely important, and learning, for example, from many of the indigenous people, indigenous community, and their relation with nature is something to really emulate and model after. And that's why we have a very successful campaign called the Outdoors for All campaign, where we basically take people to experience nature. And the earlier you start with that, the more you grow with that sensitivity and with the knowledge and with the awareness to work for the preservation of it. So in that regard, we have, we're mostly an environmental organization based in the United States, but we have offices and groups in all the major cities. There's more than 100 groups and 64 chapters. So all of them every weekend have several excursions, and environmental education is a very important component of that. So that's one way to approach it, and also it's something that it's ageless in terms of there's not a time when it's too early or too late to start with that connection with nature. Thank you.
Yes, so it's a reminder that education doesn't just happen at school, isn't it? So Joy, yes, tell us a bit about what you think climate literacy is and why you think it's important.
Yeah, so compared with the rest of the 3 panelists, I think I'm considered as less experienced one. I'm just 25, I'm already 25. And the point is that I think environment literacy or education for me, I think I would like to put it in more concrete level. I would like to know what is the cause and effects of the climate change, and then what is the future ahead of us in terms of those cause and effects. And when I think this is such a broad term, so I would like to say the climate change literacy basically is about establishing the relationship between human being and then the nature and the climate, which has stay as the humanitarian level. And the second level is about the social and economic development, which you mentioned about the green jobs. You mentioned about the innovation idea, technology development. But for young people, I would like to know what is already like the methodology has been in place, and why is work and why is not work, what we can do in further, and basically to learn how to turn challenges become opportunities. And then the third level is about like individual level. You have your own roles as your kids, you're a father, you're a mother, or you have your role in your companies. You are sales or you are a CEOs. So you have different social roles, you have different positions. That means you have to get your educated in the way that you need it. So I think this is 3 levels climate change literacy and education.
Yeah, thanks, Joy. Actually, I just wonder if just now, actually, since you've just spoken, if you could tell us a little bit about what you did when you created the Youth Leader Fund, because I think that's a really interesting story in itself, and it's good to know a little bit about why you did it.
So I was graduated from Sweden, and then I studied environment policy in Sweden. I graduated. I went back to China, and I realized due to my program, I learned a lot about climate change and environment issues. And I went back to China. I feel like I can do more there. So I generated some private funds and then go talk with the government organization. Said I want to set up this fund. I wanted to engage more young leaders to be in this field and then to educate them like what is the challenges behind why we have to do that, where is the opportunity lies. So our main audience is the tech developers and as well as the content creator that like science fictions writer, because the reason why I choose developers it is because they're working most of them work in the tech industry, and tech industry usually attract more funds, capital flow. That means that it will be easier for them to do things. And the second though, the why we have to have the content creator is because sometimes the climate change effects or causes sometimes is invisible for us, and the content like media, the arts, and then the fictions can make it visible. And I can even tell the future stories by fictions. We're working with very famous Chinese science fiction writers, and to let them to combine the AI with future climate change and the environment. And then even you say something horrible, but you have the deniabilities, which in the reality, right? So it's a really good way to educate the young people. You have to use the tools that they like. You have to use the direction they're looking at to use our tools to make your stories work. Because I feel like it's very hard to standardize the motivation of entering the climate change field. You have to diversify the motivations, let it happen in the right direction, positive directions.
Thanks. So Kamal, I'm just thinking maybe you could give us a little bit of an overview of when we look at green jobs globally, what are the range of jobs that we're looking at, and what are the kind of policies that we're going to need to make the transition to that green workforce? Sorry. Oh yeah.
Well, I think we have been a lot promoting this agenda through the concept of green jobs. But in fact, what we're really looking into is the greening of jobs. Because when we are working with countries to look at the potential for employment creation through environmental policies, one way is to confine to job creation in specific environmental sectors. One typical example is the work of the International Renewable Energy Agency. IRENA publishes this annual review on renewables and jobs. So it tells us, like in the latest review, that there were 12 million people working in renewables last year. But if you look at that, we call it in our metrics direct employment creation. Now, if you go beyond individual jobs in renewables, we know this is an industry with value chains, with back-forth and upward linkages with the rest of the economy, with suppliers, etc. And that creates a lot of indirect employment in other sectors outside of renewables. And the third level of job creation is what we consider as induced employment. A typical example is when there is a program of electrification through biogas or solar energy in an area that did not have access to electricity. The mere fact of having that access to electricity will trigger a number of other businesses. People will earn more money, and the more they earn, the more they spend, the more you stimulate the economy, the more you create some jobs elsewhere. So therefore, what we're doing is to look at that whole range of direct, indirect, and induced employment, and that gives you the big picture of jobs. Now, the other important dimension is about greening jobs. We want to avoid this notion that within labor markets, there is a segment of green, good, and cool jobs, and then there are other jobs that are like brown, dirty, and bad jobs. Because unless we work with the entire economy and help greening, whether you are in textile, in manufacturing, in transport, there is that potential for improving energy and material efficiency across the board. So you're greening occupations all over the labor market. So then that creates that much bigger opportunity for employment creation. So that is why we've been working with organizations like LinkedIn. They are going to release this report on skills for green jobs because we could use that massive data set that they have. Most of us have a LinkedIn account. But with our updating of our profiles, they're able to track patterns of change in education and to what extent literacy in climate, in environmental field is being a driver for career moves. In what industries, in what countries, and that gives us an overview of where is the workforce moving around in a bigger picture. So therefore, I mentioned these numbers of 100 million jobs possible, but I just wanted to go beyond that just number to look at the narrative and the bigger agenda. And again, that brings us to literacy because it tells us that we are in a sort of lifelong learning. People, even in professional careers like us, keep educating ourselves, and that makes it possible to move around, careers and change occupations. And so I want us to keep that notion of greening jobs and greening skills, because we acquire new skills through literacy education, and that's a kind of what we're trying to do with LinkedIn, to see if there's a big picture around the world on trend in career pathways and changes with education and climate literacy.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about climate education effectively throughout everyone's lives, and whatever work we're doing. Perhaps it needs to be rolled out for all of us in some ways. And the big question is how we do that. And I was thinking about Joy, something you said to me earlier about how, once China gets behind the idea of climate education, it's just going to work its way all the way through. Yes, is that right?
Yeah, so I think China got its own special circumstance in a way that it's a very bottom-up, top-down country. So when President Xi mentioned that we're gonna go ecological civilization, we're gonna put the whole country at one union to do the new ecological urban planning, and we have to achieve our neutrality goals by a certain of time. That means when the central government announces policy, different level governments will have their own action plan. They're gonna engage the schools, engage the enterprise, corporates, and all different sectors to make efforts in these areas. But the problem is nobody knows how to do it, right? At the very beginning. So people starting to try to do the training program, trying to create new jobs, new platforms to make the information, make the people can flow within different sectors. Then there's a new job came out. And then also, as I always mention, that when you talk about challenges, it always means that there's nobody filling the gaps, or nobody can solve some certain kind of problems, especially if we narrow it down to a specific industry. That means there are going to be more experts come out. The experts I mentioned about is usually cross-disciplinary. That means that you have to climate plus, or you are sales plus with climate change. So they're emerging something new in different sectors.
Thanks, Joy. I wondered if anyone else had any sort of reflections on where climate education is at in their own countries. Obviously, we're not in school at the moment. Joy's the only person who's relatively recently out of school. So, what are your thoughts on where in the United States or Spain things are?
Well, something that I wanted to, I already talked about our Outdoors for All campaign, but something related to green jobs and the youth as well, that it's going right now. Actually, today, the Congress of the United States is voting on the Build Back Better agenda from President Biden, and something that we have been very excited about. It's something called the Civilian Climate Corps. And the Civilian Climate Corps, it's inspired on something from the 1930s and 40s, from the time of the Great Depression, where the government came up with this Civilian Conservation Corps. And it was a way basically to employ young people, from very young age all the way to, however you define youth these days. It's certainly changed over the decades. But it was putting all these masses of young people to build trails in the protected areas, to basically, upgrade the national park system. And so right now, with the President Biden agenda, it's putting all these young people, in a way to deal with unemployment, but also it's a way to invest in education as well, to do everything from urban parks to national parks and national protected areas, to understanding how buildings work and building retrofit. So it becomes part of their employment, part of their education, and also dealing with climate change and climate literacy. So it is a way of having green jobs, but also contributing greatly to climate literacy.
I mean, just thinking about the United States, because I'm just recalling what Catherine mentioned to me earlier, which was there was an education meeting earlier at which there were, I think you said no US representatives, is that right? I don't know if you're happy to say something.
And by the way, I brought that from United States, but it's something that, relatively speaking, it's something that it's low budget, but has a great impact in both education and youth unemployment, that it's a very big issue in so many countries.
Yeah, so many of us are signed on to a campaign to promote formal education. We've been doing non-formal education since the first Earth Day created the modern environmental movement. Non-formal education is something Earth Day does, Sierra Club does, but our goal here is to create formal education, K through 12, fully integrated, assessed climate literacy in every school in the world. And we're doing it for a couple of reasons. One is that we believe in equity and justice. And there's no reason why Zimbabwe or any other country can't make their own solar panels, but they won't be able to. And the North will own every green job on the planet unless we educate our kids formally in schools. That's what we have to do. We have to integrate it from the beginning to the end. We've all been working very, very hard to promote that for the last couple of years in particular, and that's why our campaign took off when the unions joined us, through both the ILO as a supporter, Sharon Burrow, 220 million trade unions, people from trade unions joined this campaign. Education International, with 32 million union teachers joined this campaign. Why? Because they know non-formal education isn't going to cut it. It's not going to work to really build the workforce of tomorrow. So we've been pushing the government. We just went to the Education and Environmental Ministers meeting, and the U.S. was a no-show. There might be some other reasons, but it was there that we expected commitments from country, and they followed one after the other, recognizing that formal education in their K through 12 schools, assuming they can afford it, may save them from the same situation they're engaged in tech, which is they don't own any of it. So rather than have the Googles, the Facebooks, et al., owning the green economy in the 21st, 22nd century, we want the Global South to have a piece of the action. And the only way you can do that is educate people, train them for jobs, and most important, this is very, very important to Sierra Club and Earth Day, which is teach them civic skills so they can fight back against coal. And behind you, there's an interesting sign about our campaign, but more important, it's probably at the bottom, is that Brad Smith, the CEO of Microsoft, said, we need formal education in every K through 12 school, or we're not going to make it as a company. So we're really, really excited about that. So it's a combination of non-formal, formal, and other. But if we want the jobs of the future to belong to all of us in an equitable fashion, we have to educate our kids, whether it's art, music, science, reading, history, whatever it is, just like we did in the tech industry. And I think it's really important. So my comment, that was a long speech, was really about how do we get the U.S. to pay attention? How do we get all countries to pay attention and bring that together? And I'd love your reaction to that.
Well, I don't know if you've got a response to that. Like, how do we do it? Well, I mean, I just can fully agree with what Catherine has said, and I think that is why part of our work now Within the UN system, there are many organizations. There's UNESCO, UNICEF. We at the ILO are more at the interface between education and the professional world. So what we have been doing in the past few years was to understand the kinds of skills that would be needed in a green economy. Where do we see those skills now present? Where are the gaps, and how to anticipate those gaps? So we published at the COP in Madrid a global study, Skills for a Greener Future, which looked at 32 country studies. It includes the United States, includes Bangladesh, South Africa, with specific country assessment on where they stand in the skills they have today and the skills that they would need for the future. Now, building on that global review on skills for green jobs, we have a sense of the kinds of occupations that would be required, from low skill to medium skill to high skill occupations. And what we find is that the largest demand will be in the medium skills occupations. Just in back to my circular economy scenario, we find 52 million jobs would require that kind of medium skill education and retraining. Now, that is why we're working with a number of partners on a guide to green TVET systems, like vocational training and education systems, so that skills that would be required for energy efficiency, for solar panel installation, deployment, maintenance, etc. And if you have those specific curriculum for vocational training in Bangladesh, in Uganda, in South Africa, that would make it possible for those countries to capture the jobs that will come in the solar energy deployment, in bioenergy, in the hydrogen economy, etc. So that's the kind of work we're doing, but I just agree with that. If we don't build that capacity in the countries, then the potential for job would be captured elsewhere.
Yeah, maybe just before you pass it on, does anyone have any reflections on how we fund that, or how different countries are already looking at funding it? How do we fund the training?
Well, education is a public goods. Now, in most countries, it is government spending. But if I look at my own country, I'm originally from Senegal. Most good schools now have been privatized. And so you need to have that demand to stimulate investment from the private sector. But we must do our effort to push education systems like public funding to integrate that environmental element. And I just want to end by saying that part of what we do is to set up training hubs in universities. We have something called the Green Jobs Assessment Institution Network, which is a network of policy research institutions developing to develop metrics like I was talking about. And we have set up a regional training hub for English-speaking Africa, hosted by the University of Pretoria in South Africa. At the end of November, we are starting a new hub in French-speaking Africa with universities of Dakar and Abidjan. And we deliberately engage in partnerships with academic institutions so that you get this training be embedded in formal education systems, so that we have people able to use statistical measurement, input-output models to help their countries conduct the kinds of studies that we now do with PERI, the Political Economy Research Institute in the US, or GWS in Germany. We partner with those organizations, but the goal is that Dakar, Abidjan, Pretoria be able to offer those courses so that you have people equally trained in those countries to do the same.
Great. And Lucia, I'm just thinking, maybe you could talk a little bit about why Iberdrola decided it wanted to create these, or you decided, I don't know if it was you pushed it, these resources for teachers.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I think in Iberdrola we see climate change, the awareness is really key for all the society. And one of our focus is young children and young people and children in the schools. So we try to facilitate talking about always climate change and sustainability resources. I mean, we are not talking about technological skills in this case. So we made this project. It's called EducaClima, which is a platform. It's an open platform for everybody, and you can find resources mainly for teachers to try to work with water and with energy, with the different technologies in energy, with climate change, the causes, the evidences, the consequences, different for all ages, from 3 years until 18. And so we can go with the teacher to try to work together in this in the school with climate change. But it's true that it's very difficult in Spain. I mean, it's very depending on the regions. How they cope with the education on climate change and sustainability, and there are regions that are accelerating, and it's all the platforms they are using them, and they have also their own platforms. And there are other regions that are much more not using for the moment this kind of resources. No, I think the teachers, they don't have sometimes they don't have time to use the resources. But it has been really interesting. Also, during the crisis, we made a new part of the platform called "Do It at Home." So the children and the young people could do it also with only very simple questions from their teachers to work around climate change and sustainability with these resources. And we are trying to also to amplify and giving them also in Portuguese, in English, and all around the countries where Iberdrola is present.
Thanks, Lucia. I'm just thinking about, I saw the UK climate education plan that was announced today, and of course it included science, as we might expect. There's a science curriculum, but one of the other aspects was to encourage children to go out and get involved in biodiversity projects in their neighborhood. And I'm thinking that really relates to the connection with nature that is obviously at the heart of what you do, Ramon. And you were talking about outdoors for all, but are you thinking that actually it should be more beyond that? Really, there should be a sort of that connection for every single child through the education system in the States?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's our experience, and from the campaign, it shouldn't be something that it's added. No, that when they get to us or when we try to reach them, it should be something that everybody gets the access to. No, and for that, it's very important. Then the equity question, because. For us, who has access to nature, it's very important. When the Sierra Club started 130 years ago, it was a club to enjoy the outdoors, and it was a force also that advocated for the preservation of specific areas, but I must say, or our revisions of history also points towards there was a lot of exclusion in that and a lot of harm caused, because certainly the areas that are preserved today, they were also inhabited by communities that were relocated, indigenous communities. Also, ultimately was the wealthier. In the case of the U.S., often white communities that were the ones that were enjoying nature. So we cannot separate the concept of enjoying nature and having that consciousness from the question of equity and access, and inclusion. So that is very relevant, for in terms of when it comes to education, because something that we see is that traditionally the ones that have that can enjoy that are usually the wealthier communities. And for that, so we have been approaching this question of equity and inclusion, I would say in the last 10 years, much more aggressively. Even our internships for young people, now we have a policy. We cannot accept, free internships. We have to pay, because ultimately, when what we were seeing is that, well, the ones that could afford to have internships with us traditionally, well, then wealthier communities coming from wealthier institutions, no? So we have a policy now for that. So that's key for when thinking what kind of educations we want for all.
Yeah, and I think also just maybe to take it on even from there, that when we talk about climate literacy, maybe we're also talking about not just the actual knowledge about biodiversity or about climate itself, because obviously climate literacy is about climate, but also about all the other things around it, which are history and how we relate to each other. And there's a civic element there that.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, no, certainly, and also, important to bring, the intersectionality of, of causes that, in the progressive movement, for us, we can no longer think of environmentalism as in a silo, but environmental issues are racial issues, environmental issues are gender issues, environmental issues are equity, and economic justice. So in that regard, we're convinced, especially this last year after the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota, that there has been this reckoning, and dealing with systemic racism in the United States, but it has certainly spread out to other places. But how we're convinced that we cannot solve the climate crisis, unless we also bring down systems of exclusion and system of supremacy. In the case of the United States, of white supremacy, because ultimately, the notion that we can let a whole watershed, be polluted, and the communities within there, we allow that, we say sometimes, for the betterment of society as a whole, but certainly, for the communities that are within those areas that are being sacrificed, those communities become disposable, in that dynamic, and we cannot have, a notion of disposable people unless we are operating under an ideology based on supremacy, and so that's why we have to approach environmentalism and literacy, I think, not only thinking on biodiversity and the natural environment, but as a society as a whole.
Yes, thank you. I'm just thinking, obviously, because we're touching on the justice aspect of things there, maybe Kamal could talk a little bit about how we look at just transition for former fossil fuel workers and people in industries who, that we're going to have to move on from.
Well, thank you. This is a very important point, and I'm happy to talk about it, because just today at the International Labour Organization, we have at this very moment the governing body of the ILO taking place. And one of the points the governing body is discussing is the future agendas of the International Labour Conference, which is the highest authoritative body of the ILO. And one of the agenda items they are considering is whether or not the ILO would want to have a labor standard on just transition. So the discussion started today, but the decision will be taken next week, and so we're hoping that the ILO would move towards a standard setting on just transition, because that would be very helpful. Right now, what exists is a set of guidelines that have a very long name, but I'll say it all. It says Guidelines for a Just Transition Towards Environmentally Sustainable Economies and Societies for All. So these are guidelines that were adopted in 2015, just right before the Paris Conference on Climate Change. But what is important about those guidelines is that they come from a tripartite meeting of experts where the workers, like Sharon Barrow and her organization, the employees and governments came together on a consensus. It defines a number of principles around the just transition, and it identifies active and passive labor market policies that would need to go hand in hand with climate and environmental policies so that no one is left behind. It speaks of skills policies, because as we talked about, there will be opportunities for jobs, but we need to skill the workforce for that. There will be unavoidable loss of employment and income. We know it from the fossil fuel industry, and that is why it is important to think of social security and social protection together with climate change mitigation and adaptation policies. I can give an example. In my country, tourism is a second source of foreign exchange, but with coastal erosion, the part of the country that is most prominent for sea-based tourism has lost almost a third of businesses and the workers in those tourist resorts. Now, what climate change adaptation is about is putting concrete blocks to stop the sea from encroaching further. But as they do that, businesses are closing down, people are losing their jobs. What do you do with it? So we need to connect social security and social protection, income protection, with the climate agenda. So therefore, the guidelines, they look at this range of policies and they frame that in the context of a social dialogue, which is also critical, that government should not sit alone in silo and decide on climate and environmental policies. They need to be engaging with business. They need to engage with workers, because at the end of the day, these are actors in the real economy. So the guidelines, they offer all that that framework, and we are now working with a number of countries to use them as they define their policies. And very fortunately, in the current round of updating NDCs, ITUC has estimated that some 49 countries have taken elements of those guidelines and reflected just transition in their NDCs. We're now working with them on implementation, and this is a first but quite important step. And I know Canada and a number of other countries going towards federal legislation on just transition are also looking at how to draw from those guidelines. So therefore, it's a central element. We need to ensure just transition, but it has to be done through a framework and comprehensive policies that are, that need to go together, not pick and choose, but it's a comprehensive framework of policies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things I sometimes wonder is like how do we persuade people that, because a lot of us don't like change and we don't necessarily want to retrain, and we don't, we'd like to keep the jobs that we have, and I think even with something like a just transition, which we speak about a lot here in Scotland, I heard that there'd been some sort of survey of oil workers in which very few had even heard of a just transition, or at least didn't know what it was. So, I just think that maybe there's still a certain amount, how do we get people over that fear, that big hump of fear?
Yeah, no, I just give an example. My sister-in-law works for Total in Senegal. She manages infrastructure. But I've told her, she's engineer by training, I told her you have to be getting an executive program or a degree on climate, education, environment, because at some point in your career, you'll find that if you don't have that, you won't be moving up. So I think, and I just felt the same. First, she was saying, "Why would I need that?" Because she's happy with the way she's like in, and I just yes, echo what you're saying. But it requires engagement, education, and because that in the future people would need that, and that is why I was talking about greening jobs and greening occupations.
Yes. I just actually wanted to return to, because there were three things in the new climate education plan for the UK, and one of them was this Climate Leader Award. And when I was speaking to Joy earlier, I thought one of the things that's interesting about you is that you are about focusing on people who are already being leaders in the community and fostering them. So maybe you could talk do you want, yeah.
Yeah, so actually I started the climate change communication education back in 2016, which is considerable long to me anyways. And then I realized that I only do the grassroots level education, and then they can be educated in a way. But in terms of came out the scalable solutions, which is very hard. So later afterwards, I realized that I need to engage these youth leaders in different sectors who already have their influential groups, as well as listeners, followers, had the access to tools, access to making changes, and then they are become my main targets. And then as soon as I engage to educate the tech developers in like the OpenAI, PaaS in China, as well as the big company like Alibaba, Ele.me, which is a huge delivery company in China. I called out all those developers in those big companies who are responsible for developing those products. I educate them. Do you actually have an idea about like the products you made has what kind of climate change or environment issue to the society? They have no idea, because they don't have a big full picture about the products they are doing. They only do the parts that they do, and they combine all together, which is the products, right? But those products are adapted by all the Chinese, which is 1.3 billion people using that. So instead of to educate people to asking, I want change of these products, which is impossible for me. So why not educate them to have some kind of setting up the kind of environment-friendly, sustainable mindset in terms of those in those people who actually have power. So that's what we do. So now we are now have the huge developer community in China. They are the super like intelligence developers in China, as well as the content creator who are science fiction writers, as well as the policymaker as well. So they all need to educate it. When we talk about government or corporates, whatever, all the like players, we just talk about human. We all talk about humans, so just educate each of them. This is very important at different level to children, to youth, and to adults. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, we're thinking a lot about youth today, and the youth themselves have been pushing hard for climate education. We've heard their voices a lot and have strong ideas about what they should be learning. I wonder, do you think it's important that we include the ideas of the young in even how they're educated? Does anyone want to jump on that one?
Okay, so maybe I can start from based on my experiences. What I found out, at least in my based on my experiences in China, and when people there's a huge gap between the current education curriculum we're learning in school and the industry needs, and what we're learning in school is totally out of date. And then what the market needs, what the challenge needs, the innovators, enablers, just like there's no way to get what exactly the market, the company, the society wants. And then also when I work with those entrepreneurs, the young entrepreneurs, no matter where they graduate from all over the world, they come back to China and say, I get it, I'm gonna change China, I'm gonna change the society. And then they are sitting there and pat their head and say, okay, I have an idea. I want to set up a company. I want to be the innovator. But actually, the idea that came out already being tested by the industry itself. So they're kind of waste of like double with the energy and the time to do so. So what if we can bridge the industry leaders or people in the industry with the campus, with the young leaders? That will save so much energy and so much resources as well. So there is a special pattern right now happening in China. It's called cooperative and campus relationship. So usually the big campus, big corporates who has the money or big enough, they will set up different labs, different channel with different universities to provide industry information to those students, to those different level students. For university students, usually they eat more from practical level, and for the what do I mean? The practical level is like about the job. It's about I offering a job. I need those talents who can can help the company to move forward to a grand direction, right? Because the company don't know how to do it. They need talents. And for the young children, they bring them to the company to have a visit, to understand how the corporate works in terms of the climate change protection, climate change as well as environment protection.
I'm just wondering if do you want to? Yeah, go
well,
on.
I mean,
go
I'm
sorry,
not an
sorry.
expert on
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you know, for me,
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at how successful corporations are, when it comes to consumer products, the use of focus group and understanding their audience is very important. So for me, it's
The focus.
sounds like
the focus group. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer then that you need to, if you're talking about how children learn best and education for them, to include them in that input, it's a no-brainer, should be.
I mean, we're also talking a lot about retraining people, but there is, I just wonder if there's any thoughts on the general level of public education and how do we communicate more?
I have two cases that I can share. One case is done by the Alibaba. They developed a game called Forest. So basically, you buy stuff from Taobao or like you cycling, you take public transportation, you get energy from your phone, which is Alipay. And when you get certain amount of energy, you can adopt a tree at the digital store. And once you you have to continue put energy to watering this trees, and at a certain level they will plant a real tree in the areas that needed the trees, and then later they use that to educate the public. See, you play the game, which is fun. At the same time, you do something good for the environment. What if they put the environment education at the very beginning instead of making the game more fun, which won't work? And then there is another case. It's called Quista game. The game is about it's also the game is encouraging people to go into the nature and take picture of the trees, plants, and then the animals, and upload it on the app. And then once experts recognize those animals, and then you can get some payback from the game. So that's also create incentives to those audience to participate. As I said at the very beginning, in terms of educating the public, you never do to standardize the motivation of why should they care about environment? Why should they care about climate change? You have to put the facts there, and then let them, because they have different roles, right? Different industry. Let them to figure out incentives behind, provide that incentives. Never judge them about the incentives why they are going to that field. Otherwise, you already put your audience in your opposite position, which is not good from my experiences.
Catherine, it looks like you might have something to say or ask. I don't know. You haven't done that one, yeah.
This is a question for Ramon. One of my favorite campaigns on the planet was Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign, for which they received a huge amount of money and did an incredibly great job. But in the context of environmental education and training jobs for the future, I know a lot about your techniques and tactics and how incredible you were in stopping power plants, coal-fired power plants, from moving forward. But I know very little about how you replaced the jobs for the workers that you put out of business, that we all hoped we would put out of business, and move them into something else. And I'm wondering how you combine that job strategy with the strategy of ending coal-fired power plants, because I know you did it.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much for that, Kathleen. And for those of you that who may not know the campaign, the Beyond Coal campaign, probably one of the most successful campaigns in the history of the environmental movement, and we have been able to either close or schedule to close about 2/3 of the coal plants in the United States, and that was in big way thanks to former Mayor Bloomberg, right, that just announced in this conference that basically is taking a lot of, I guess, the lessons from there, but internationally, right, and to do the same internationally. We're not involved in that area, just in case I'm not promoting it here or self-promoting. But well, that was partly very successful because of the focus, and having the ability to deploy a lot of organizers doing very targeted, a very targeted effort, in very specific places in the United States. So there was the aspect of location, there was the aspect of the specialized focus on that. When it comes to a platform for replacing that, it has. We're very hopeful on what is happening in Congress now, because I cannot think of many other aspects of doing it in a massive way unless there's some government intervention and coordination with the private sector. Because in the case of the U.S., I'm not saying this would be the same in other places where there's either better coordination or a focus on the collective. Which is not the case in the U.S. It's like, private property and individualism is what reigns, over there. But so, in the Build Back Better agenda, there's a focus on transitioning that. And sometimes I'm amazed how a lot of the focus of the opposition comes from places where coal is still very important, and it's so short-sighted, because it's like, well, if you have the opportunity to actually lead in the technology of the future and of the 21st century, why are you stuck with a technology from the 1800s? So it's not even from the 20th century. We have been burning coal since the 1800s, and so it has to come hand in hand. But unfortunately, a lot of the leaders and corporate leaders there have not seen that. So I don't see in any other way than when you have that coordination between government and private sector, that you can have that transition or just transition done in a fair way. And of course there's always a political game of where funding is allocated and where would we go. But again, it's just I'm amazed that those leaders in the states where these the dirty fuels are more relevant cannot use that to negotiate their transition, and be sure that there's a lot of focus on that. Because so I'm sorry if I'm not answering completely, in terms of strategy, but we're very effective environmental advocates and campaigners. We hope to have a say, but we hope we're not the leaders of designing the economic transformation, because many other in the private sector and the government should be doing that, not the environmental advocates. Thank you.
I just wonder if Kamal might have something that he'd like to say in response to that. I was just thinking, you looked like you had some thoughts maybe on the...
Well, I just think that if Sharon Barrow was here today, she would say that the workers are not stuck to the economy and the technologies of the past. And I think that they're not thinking we should be using coal until the world totally runs out of coal to find something else. Because in our own history as humanity, we had the Stone Age, like people said. With the Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stone. We still have stones around the place, but we found better, and we know how to make knives with metal and other things. But I think what the trade union movements is asking for is to be part of the discussion, and and they like to say it's just like a dish. If you are not at the table, you are the menu. And the workers don't want to be the menu. They want to be at the table and discuss with industry, with government, so that you plan coal phase out, you plan plant closure. And there are many successful examples. Hazelwood in Australia. So ITUC has documented a lot of good examples of very well planned coal phase out, where you also look at opportunities for redeploying the workforce elsewhere. There are many challenges, and we have to recognize that. And in our own analysis, we point to two of them. One is what we call this temporal disconnection, which is that the moment a coal plant is closed somewhere in the US, in South Africa, and the moment new employment is created for the workforce, former workers to be absorbed, is not immediate. So you have that temporal disconnection, and there might be geographical disconnection. We may see a lot of more jobs coming in wind energy, in solar energy, but miles away from where the jobs are lost. So therefore, it's why policy is important and planning to make it possible. But what I know from the union movement is that they are not sticking to jobs that they know will need to change, industries that the world need to move out of, but they want that to be done in a just transition process, through planning, through social dialogue. And I must say, in the ILO, in today governing body discussion, it is the workers that were asking for a standard setting. The employers don't want it. But the workers, since I came to the ILO, I was surprised. I never understood why is it that workers are driving the green agenda, because in my mind, they should be worried about jobs. But it was the opposite. And I came to realize that they know the change is inevitable. You must now discuss it, anticipate, find solutions, and not just lay back and be on the defensive. So it's a complex agenda, but what motivates me personally is that the workers are at the forefront of this agenda.
Thanks, Kamal. That's great. I'm just wondering if anyone does have a question out there. Anyone want to ask anything? Or I can just fire ahead and ask a few more, but if there's anyone who wants to jump in. No. Okay, great. Shall I actually maybe...
Hello, thank you very much. Ismail Farjab from the African Youth Climate Hub.
I don't know if we can hear you yet.
You can.
That's my volume's a bit...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's better.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ismail
Yeah.
from the African Youth Climate Hub, and thank you, esteemed speakers, for these enlightening thoughts. But my question would be that we know that climate education is crucial and is important. And we now see that countries are engaging in in assuring this formal kind of education. But the question I'm asking now is, we get engagement right, but do we have the right approach for a sustainable climate education? In what sense are we going to adopt still a traditional approach of educating our young people for climate education? We know that climate change today is something that is impacting the whole world, and that information gets old really quickly. So the approach to educating for climate needs to be something flexible and something dynamic, where we also need to include the co-construction of knowledge. So we need to take in consideration young people not only as recipients of education, but also as providers of data and providers of knowledge. So to what extent potentially your organizations or your unions are working towards a strategic general approach for a more innovative way of educating our young people? Thank you.
Would anyone like to take that one? Ramon? Yes. Okay, so.
I mean, well, I mean, I already pointed out to a couple of the things that we do. I mean, but ultimately, an organization like mine, we have campaigns, national campaigns, and organizing. So a lot of the organizing, is often done with young people that have the passion and the drive, the desire, and so we I think either if even when we don't see it as a formal education, the organizing part of it, it's a very it's a sorry it's a form of education that it's very important, and not only for the people, the organizers, but for the communities that are impacted, no, and that. I would say though that a lot of that our methodology of organizing has also changed and evolved in recent years, adopting what is called the Hemes principles for democratic organizing. Organizations like ours that were, relatively speaking, very big, would often come and address an issue, and parachute into a community. And right now, under the Hemes principles, it's much more based on mutuality and collaboration. We go to places where we're invited, and we often may use I mean, we're still learning, how to do that, but become also collaborators in sharing the resources or accessing the sources of funding and things like that. So, that I don't know if that goes exactly to what you're asking in terms of alternative, curriculum, etc. But it's just unless we change, the systems of how we operate in a traditional way, it's we're going to remain with the same problems, right? So in terms of, our organizing is changing in that way. But you could argue the same for, regular education, etc. No?
Yes, just to add, maybe we are not specialized in education, but it's true that we see that it's a very good idea, and I think the education is changing in order to learn by projects and to make projects with the community around. So there are many work in terms of mitigation and adaptation sometimes, and reducing pollution on the community, on the neighborhood, that they could do, the students, and this will be really interesting. But it's true that also that has been, it's true that the teachers has to also to need a training to upskill and reskill, no, in order to how to put the student in the center and to change the way to teach, no. And this is, yes, I think this is important. And also, it's true that technologies, I think they have to also to teach new technologies, new ways. Iberdrola, from the energy perspective, I mean, there is these new renewable technologies for generation, but we have also to teach in terms of the uses of energy and to green the uses of energy. I mean, there is 50% that is generating electricity, and we can do it renewable all, but there is a 50% that is the use of other energies. This is buildings, how we heat our home. This is the industry, the transport. So all these things, I think they have also to go to the education, to change also the way how do we live every day, no?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking that actually recently I spoke to a group of teachers who were talking about rewilding education. And, I know we sometimes overuse the word rewild, but I think that accorded with some of the stuff that you're talking about there. My next question sort of follows on from that a little bit, in that I'm just wondering what beyond the science, the facts, we think we need to teach young people today, or that young people need to learn at school. And because, I can think of one off the top of my head that I'm always bothered about, which is, how are our kids and ourselves going to navigate the world of information and misinformation and social media. And I think these things have an impact on how we deal with climate. So it's not just about teaching about what's happening with energy. I just wondered if anyone else has a thing that they think we really need to teach that one at schools. Anyone? No.
Well, I think the point that you've made, Vicky, about information and misinformation is quite important, because in the sphere of policy, that is the question about the science of climate change, which is still, every time the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change publishes these scientific reports, but that does not prevent from some people not believing that climate change is real and it's a human induced. There are people who think that this is natural processes, and I just make an anecdote. I was reading the Quran yesterday. There's this surah Arad, we talked about the thunder, and it says, can't you see that we come to earth and we reduce it from all sides? Now imagine somebody who believes in the Quran, in the Bible, and reads like that and would say, well, in fact, this is an act of God. I can't do anything about it, because if the Bible says that we are coming to the earth and we're reducing it from all parts, what can I do about it as a human? So therefore, the way we absorb information, even as adults and kids, and be able to interpret it is quite critical. And in this age where information flows from all over the place in social media, it's quite important. So therefore, how we educate, absorb information, and be able to interpret it in the right way is just fundamental.
Catherine's got something.
Sorry, I've been talking a lot. I think I would only add that we haven't approached for us, which is the biggest thing, that no country in the world teaches civics. The United States doesn't teach civics. China doesn't teach civics. Nobody teaches civics. A little bit. We learn about governments. We learn how to get behind them, but we don't really learn how to challenge them, work the system, request information, sue our governments, sue our corporations in an effective way. I can't even manage to get my local government to stop cutting down trees, mostly because I can't navigate the system, and I'm a lawyer. But I think for us, and I wonder if any of you feel the same way, that we really need to add civic education to our climate literacy campaign, because honestly, to speak in the vernacular, it's the poor people that are going to get screwed, and they really, really need civic skills in order to fight back. It can't be just environmental groups. There aren't enough of us. There are 7.8 billion people, and if we're lucky, 10 million environmentalists. So we really have to figure out how we can give those skills to ordinary people who are not in the movement, but are suffering from the ills of climate change. Or I just wonder how all of you feel.
Well, this is like the toughest question for me. Come on. I mean, I think I think it's like I think different places, as we mentioned, when we're talking about tackling climate change, we always think like we have to be localized, right? As we mentioned about the climate change education, how can we to be more adaptive to current nowadays situation. I think it's we can still do it in a traditional way without breaking the system itself, without the traditional measures itself, but we can change the content, also the way we deliver it. And another way around is like, as I mentioned, like there are so many ways you can affect the individual, the individual who actually have power, and then you got find a way to have impact on them. There are gonna be slightly changes on that. So it's just exactly the same as the public education. Don't ever put yourself before you really step out. You already put your public in opposition of you. So I think, especially under Chinese circumstance, you have to be more careful about that. Definitely, there is a way out, but you have to play it wisely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot agree more. No, that the notion of civics is very important. You know, unfortunately, what we see in a lot of public education systems is the heavily investing in the technical careers and engineers and math and science. It's important, and of course, we know that that is important, but unless you also invest in civics, then you're not creating, engage, you know. Society or citizenry, in that. So yeah, I cannot agree more that that needs to be saved.
Yes, I agree totally. I mean, if we are educating to take care of the planet, I think we have to educate to take care of everybody, humans, the planet, the nature, everybody, everyone. And the truth is we have to go together. We have to go all. So I mean, this is I think the transition, the recovery is an opportunity to recover also inequalities that there are now, no, in the current model. So it's also. We try in Iberdrola with all of our investments to have a dialogue with every agent, every stakeholder that will be affected by our investments, because this is our commitment is with the planet, with the clean energy, but of course with the society. So this is important, really important and key.
Does Kamal want to say anything, or shall I? Yeah.
Well, I just was saying, I remember when I went to primary school, we had civic education. So you start with that, but I'll ask my children if they have that now.
I think in the UK there's small amounts, but they really are small. You know, they feel gestural, and I'm totally with you, Catherine. I think it's essential. Just another question. I'm just wondering why, if anyone has any thoughts on why we've been so slow on climate education across the globe, in terms of it's really, the actual teaching of it in schools has been so poor up until now.
Anybody? Well, I mean, I know that we're on time, but yeah, I mean, but no, yeah, but I mean, in terms of, I would see it as, I mean, it has been slow, and at the same time, when looking back, it's how much we have advanced, because I remember, only like 15 years ago when Hurricane Katrina hit in the coast of Louisiana, you could have like one article on climate change a week in a publication. Now you open and half of it. I mean, these days, of course, everything is here is the center of the world, but yeah, no, there's so much. So hopefully it's that it's also translates in more actions. So.
Yes, I totally agree. I think we have advanced a lot. I don't know, maybe we are in a kind of tipping point and we're going to accelerate. We have to, and well, sometimes it's a question of resources. Maybe the COVID crisis also has put us in a way that everything can change in one day. So I think maybe climate change in this way will be much more important in the schools and in education. This is why.
No, just for me, I agree. As Raymond said, that there's progress, but it is the pace. I think just need to accelerate the pace of change, and I think we all align in that.
Yeah, well, so I think it is overtime now, so I think I just stretched it out an extra few minutes, but I just wanted to say thanks to the wonderful panel here. It's been so interesting to hear so many reflections from different backgrounds and different countries, and thanks to Earth Day for hosting us. Thanks, Catherine.